Dear fellow Africans, welcome to the 2021 Africa Month Public Symposium. My name is Lennon Munyai. I'll be co-hosting this event with my dear sister Mabel from the Nelson Mandela School of Governance. This event is an annual feature on our calendar, and it is co-organized by 3 institutions: the African Peer Review Mechanism, the University of Cape Town, as well as the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. Today, we are celebrating Africa, and we are joined by colleagues from all over the continent, including the African diaspora. You are encouraged to use the chat box to tell us who you are, where you are joining from, and most importantly, what makes you proud to be an African. This event—
Recording in progress.
This event is really geared for African youth who make the majority of the continent. It was organized by African youth as well. The topics for the event, they're also largely focusing on African youth. We are having this event under the theme Arts, Culture, Heritage, leveraging levers that are leveraging the building of Africa we want. And when the event was starting, we had that beautiful music from Mr. Jibril, our IT specialist, who was giving us sounds from throughout Africa. We thank you for that. So before we get into the event, let me bring on board my co-moderator, Ms. Mabo, that she will introduce herself before we get going. Ms. Mabo, you have the floor.
Good morning and welcome to all of you. Thank you, Lennon, for that warm introduction. It is an exciting morning, and I'm privileged to work here at the University of Cape Town with the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. Today, the spotlight is on our African youth. As we know, we want to harness that demographic dividend. And to kick us off, without further ado, our first speaker this morning is Ambassador Ombeni Sefue, the chair of the African Peer Review Mechanism panel of eminent persons who hails from Tanzania. His career in the diplomatic service has been celebrated in Tanzania and beyond. We are honored to invite Ambassador Sefue to deliver the first speech in celebration of Africa Day and Africa Month. Ambassador Sefue, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mabel, for those kind words. Good morning, everybody. Ms. Kenewendo, the former Minister for Investment, Trade and Industry of Botswana, Professor Patikeng, Vice Chancellor of UCT, Mr. Michael Chukwemeka, Nigeria Youth Vanguard, keynote speakers, moderators, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I suppose all protocol has been observed. On behalf of the panel of eminent persons of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, which I'm privileged to chair this year, I want to express our profound appreciation of the collaboration we have with the University of Cape Town and the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance in hosting this 2021 Africa Day Symposium, focusing on the youth of our beloved continent. So please allow me to begin by expressing the APRM's deep gratitude towards our partners, without whom this event could not be a reality. We also welcome all the keynote speakers, the participants and guests, and thank you all for joining us. We also want to congratulate all fellow Africans on marking the day that 58 years ago, as more and more African countries were gaining their independence, the decision was taken by the first generation leaders of Free Africa to unite and have the political and economic muscle to claim Africa's rightful place in the global arena. Much has happened since then. Much remains unfinished. Much is yet to be done. That is why we must focus on the youth, for it is the youth of Africa on whose shoulders will lie the task of accomplishing this dream. And for that to happen, it's necessary for the youth to receive the preparation they need, prominent of which is their education, their skills, and their health. Of equal importance is the matter of the life-threatening and destabilizing conflicts in several parts of our continent, as well as delays in integrating our economies, creating the scale that will catapult Africa into being an important player in the global economy and win the war on abject poverty. There is also the important matter of youth participation in discussing and finding solutions to these and many other challenges that we face on our continent. It is equally important that the African youth are conscious of who they are, where the continent came from, and where it has to go. Only a correct understanding of their history and their identity and destiny will entrench in them the nationalism and Pan-African ideals necessary to propel the continent forward. An example out of many others is having youth-initiated and led creative enterprises that have not only huge socio-economic potential if provided with the right support, but can also. We're living in unusual times. The COVID-19 pandemic has shaken our lives and forced us to think innovatively about how to transform our economies, promote peace and sustainable development, as well as find durable solutions to poverty and governance challenges. In these times, building resilience has become a key priority, and the role and contribution of women and youth is indispensable. The African Union has themed 2021 Arts, Culture, and Heritage, Levers for Building Africa We Want. This year also marks the African Youth Charter's 15th anniversary. Hence, we need to recognize and celebrate the youth of Africa and the potential power they carry in changing the narrative. In this connection, this year's symposium is centered around the theme Youth Development and Participation on the African Continent during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, the youth have been one of the most affected groups by this pandemic. Youth unemployment has been aggravated by the health crisis, while issues of meaningful youth participation and representation in political processes, misalignment of the education curriculum with national and international market demands, and forced migration on account of conflicts still persist on our continent. One way to help is to take advantage of Africa's trend and opportunities created by the rise of technology and the African Free Trade Area, and many others. As a dynamic group, highly adaptable and resilient, the youth should be mainstreamed in all policymaking fora across different sectors, whether political, economic, corporate, social, and many others. We in APRM believe that active youth participation and engagement at different levels is a critical factor for good governance, economic growth, and sustainable development. In order to see Africa's youth rise to its full potential, it is paramount for member states to implement fully all relevant key instruments, notably the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030, that is the SDGs, and the African Youth Charter. Additionally, we should prioritize meaningful cross-sectoral partnerships towards advancing the youth agenda in Africa and therefore promote greater accountability among stakeholders. We need to encourage and facilitate the youth to create collaborative networks of creatives, entrepreneurs, civic innovators who can celebrate their African heritage, highlight the history and culture of Pan-Africanism, while also showcasing and promoting indigenous talent. APRM is a tool for sharing experiences, as you know, reinforcing best practices, identifying deficiencies, and assessing capacity building needs to foster policies, standards, and practices that lead to political stability, high economic growth, sustainable development, and accelerated sub-regional and continental economic integration. Member countries within the APRM undertake self-monitoring in all aspects of their governance and socio-economic development. Youth issues are cross-cutting matters we look at when, as APRM, we peer review each other on governance. In that regard, we are guided by the 4 pillars of the African Union roadmap on harnessing the demographic dividend through investment in youth, which are employment and entrepreneurship, youth education and skills development, health and well-being, rights governance, and youth empowerment. As the panel of eminent persons of the APRM, we welcome various initiatives undertaken in this regard by African youth, including when last year they produced a youth policy paper published by the African Union Office of the Youth, whom we work very well with in collaboration with the Africa Centers for Disease Control. The report entitled Africa Youth Lead, Facts and Figures of Africa Youth Agency, Challenges and Recovery Roadmap on COVID-19. The panel would like to recommend that all African governments take seriously what the youth have written, particularly the recommendations that they have put forth, including the proposal for an urgent rethink of the continent's governance systems to provide the youth a space to contribute their innovative ideas to the development in the continent's post-pandemic recovery. We also welcome the initiative in May last year to create the AU Youth Advisory Board and the Africa Youth Front on Coronavirus, a high-level policy and advocacy framework for young people to co-lead Africa's response to COVID-19 and related issues. As a panel of the APRM, we also welcome DRC, which joined the APRM in March this year, and we urge all remaining 14 countries to do likewise, in line with the decision taken at the 11th extraordinary session in 2018, aiming at universal accession. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that today's symposium will add to our understanding of all these challenges facing the youth of Africa, which from our experience, all African countries continue to grapple with, and provide valuable inputs into efforts at national and continental level to address them. I thank you all for your kind attention, and I wish the symposium every success. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Sefue, for reigniting the call for Africans all over the world, also in the diaspora. We recognize you. Some of you are joining all the way from Russia in order to participate in this event. And we all join this call to finish the work that began so many years ago, Ambassador. You also emphasize the need for the inclusion of women and youth in defining where we have to go in order to realize the Africa that we want. In celebrating our African youth, today we have a number of young people who will be leading our discussions. We encourage you to take up the call and participate in these initiatives that Ambassador Sefue has outlined that are taking place under the auspices of the African Union and a number of other organizations that are represented today. Please participate, add your voice to the discussions via our hashtags, hashtag Africa Month, hashtag Africa Day, hashtag Africa Day 2021. Our next speaker is Mr. Michael Chukwuemeka, who is a member of the African Peer Review Mechanism Youth Vanguard in Nigeria. Mr. Chukwuemeka's powerful testimony of victory over drug addiction is a reminder to all of us that our past does not have to be our prison. If we are able to hope, to exercise resilience, and build support networks that pass on the love and generosity that we receive, change is always possible. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome you, Mr. Chukwuemeka, to deliver the next speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my sister Mabel, for that warm introduction. And good day, everyone, participants from all over the world. Please permit me to stand on the existing protocols already established by Ambassador Johanna Yusuf the APRM chairperson. Thank you very much, sir, for those remarks as well. And all over the world, participants, thank you for joining this great and honorable symposium, high-level symposium, which is aimed at fostering Agenda 2063 and celebrating our African heritage. Today, I also want to kindly permit you to appreciate Mr. President Muhammadu Buhari, the GCFR, for establishing the landmark of youth participation in governance. I also want to thank the CEO, AUDA NEPAD Nigeria, in the name of Honorable Princess Gloria Akobondu, for establishing and always putting the affairs of youth in the frontier of progress. I cannot forget to thank Professor Eddie Maloka, CEO APRM Continental, for inaugurating the Nigerian Youth Vanguard on the 22nd of March, 2021. The Nigerian Youth Vanguard has always been on the marching run to foster Agenda 2063, and we have started since the day of our inauguration to make sure we champion achievable plans in our early warning awareness, in our Catch Them Young program, which we have established and carried out across institutions and local governments, communities in Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the 38 member states to ascend the APRM in 2003. And we have conducted our first peer review in 2008 and currently undergoing our second peer review cycle under the leadership of Honorable Princess Gloria Akobondu, CEO and National Coordinator, AUDA NEPAD. Nigeria Youth Vanguard is a testimony of good and well leadership, willing to get youths involved in activities that showcases and amplify the Agenda 2063. The Continental APRM secretaries have been in the process of upscaling the participation in the governance and review of fine-tuning the African we want. And on this note, the South African youths are handing over the written document for the APRM on the Wednesday, 26th of May, 2021. And this is a big and meaningful achievement for we all as it contributes to our development and Africans across. I urge all member states to support the innovation and participation of youth to foster the Agenda 2063, bringing youth on board into the areas of national and international affairs through the objective of the APRM is a great and formidable achievement, and the agenda, fostering the Agenda 2063, which is the African we want. Most of us have experienced and witnessed the momentum of vices across Africa, which have also veiled opportunities to build a strong, united network for common goals. However, there are still a lot of gap to be filled in, and it all lies on us as African youths, if truly and really we say we are heritage and good citizens of Africa, to take the bull by the horn. Today, we review peace and security, architecture. We also reinforce on our trade under the auspices of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and the decolonization of the African curriculum to coin out a way forward and an achievable one. The APRM Youth Vanguard offer we, the African youth, a great opportunity to amplify our voices and act together nationally and internationally as global citizens in shaping the African we want. As youth, I urge us to rise to the clarion call, to call for in our nation to take full responsibility in achieving these goals and aspiration by promoting the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063 amongst the youth. Yes, there are big challenges, especially in the areas of unemployment across Africa. And the APRM report consistently mentioned this as an early warning to member states to take notes and see how we could mitigate this space of unemployment. That's why the 4 E's have been established also to aid us on that aspect. However, the affairs of our continent still beckon on us as youths to be patriotic citizens. We cannot sit around complaining about things. We have to do something about it and act on them now. My fellow great African youths, Africa is our home at the end of the day. No matter our second citizenship or residence in diaspora. Like they say, charity begins at home. I thank you all for this privilege to share with you on this good day of our African Day, and also to reinforce on the way forward in achieving our goals and aspirations. God bless you, and God bless the great Africa and protect the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, my brother Michael, for those words of encouragement. You touched on a pressing issue that you called an early warning for African Union member states, the issue of unemployment. But unemployment, one of the causes is the issue of education that we have. And when we talk about education, you cannot speak about education without mentioning our deputy mother, the fab academic. For me, it's a great honor to actually introduce the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town. I remember a few years back at Wits University, as she was capping me when I graduated. And I think for a lot of participants here throughout the continent and some in the diaspora, you have interacted a lot with Professor Pakeng. She's a professor of mathematics. Previously, she was an executive dean at the University of South Africa, UNISA, widely published. She has received the Order of the Baobab for her great contributions to research. And I consider her a feminist, as well as a great scholar that's forever encouraging young people to make education fashionable. On a weekly basis, as young people, we interact with her on social media platforms where she's forever encouraging us to study and further our studies, particularly in our postgraduate studies. So without further ado, let me welcome Professor Pakeng to take the floor, and welcome you all and give her opening remarks. Prof, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. Good morning, Dumelang, Sanbonani, Molweni, Jambo, everyone. On behalf of the University of Cape Town and the African Peer Review Mechanism, I welcome you all to this virtual symposium. I'm glad that we can hold this important meeting online because it allows many people to attend who would not be able to come to a physical meeting, either because of time constraints or because of the cost of travel. This symposium takes place, of course, against the backdrop of the African Union theme, arts, culture, and heritage, levers for building the Africa we want. While we welcome everyone to this symposium, it is particularly important that young people are involved in discussion of youth development and participation in Africa. They will not only be involved in rebuilding Africa in the future, but they have a leadership role to play even now. If they cannot attend as panelists or online audience members, I hope they will watch the podcast of these proceedings, and that there will be a process for those who have responses to engage with us afterwards. It has taken centuries for us as Africans to have the freedom to voice what kind of continent we want. Oftentimes it's others who tell us what kind of confident we should want or we should be. And this year, we celebrate the 15th anniversary of the African Youth Charter, which affirms the right of young people to participate in all spheres of society and to have platforms to participate in decision-making at all levels of governance, among other things. What a privilege we have today to include our future generations in discussing Africa's peace and security, building a strong African continental free trade agreement, and decolonizing education. One of the slogans that young people emphasized during South Africa's university student protest movement a few years ago is "nothing about us without us." There are good reasons to take that phrase to heart. In the first place, we want youth to participate in Africa's development. They need to be able to own their role on this continent. And in the second place, the young people of today are not even waiting for us to invite them. I mean, if you think about it, they're not waiting for us to tell them to act on their future. Many of them are already active, but their future is also our future and the future of our children and grandchildren. So we all have a responsibility to engage with each other and work together. So the slogan, nothing about us without us, can apply to all Africans, including those of us who have experience in leadership roles, and especially the future generations who will be affected by our decisions today or our actions today. Young people of today have embraced a set of attitudes, values, and behaviors that are completely different from traditional views. And sometimes they are misunderstood because sometimes we as adults expect them to have the same attitudes, values, and behaviors that we had years ago. The mindset of the young people today, the mindset they promote, is characterized very simply as putting people and the planet ahead of all other goals, including profit. And this makes discussions with them difficult because they don't always look at profit, but they look at other goals, like what does it mean for the planet? It is clear to all of us that our world is in great need of change. Africa is facing the same problems as the rest of the world: climate change and sustainability of energy resources, land and water, poverty, unemployment and inequality, gender inequality and gender-based violence, the migration of people from areas of war and economic need, urbanization and strain upon infrastructure and resources like water, electricity, housing, waste disposal and roads, crime and corruption, and the general collapse of public trust in leadership, which suggests that most people no longer believe presidents, CEOs, even university leaders, many people no longer believe that these kinds of leaders are credible anymore. And so we as leaders have a challenge to prove our credibility, not only in what we say, but in what we do as well. One aspect of change that UCT is aiming for is unleashing human potential for a fair and just society. This is the goal of UCT's Vision 2030. We drafted this vision with the recognition that our lives have already been disrupted, with the fourth industrial revolution changing how we shop, how we bank, how we communicate, and even hold conferences like this one. We were discussing Vision 2030 before the world heard of COVID-19. The pandemic has underscored for us both that change is here and that Africans need to take the initiative in managing how we will change rather than wait for the change to happen and run after it. In the past, when change came to Africa, it was usually brought by a colonial power. Today, global change is being managed by economic, political, and business powers. But that doesn't mean that we cannot initiate our own changes as Africans. Already, many of our young people are initiating change in their own lives. They are getting educated, they are earning degrees and launching careers. Some of them are launching businesses that we've never heard of. They are becoming entrepreneurs, including using the online space to make a living. They are taking up courses as activists. They are investing their energy to create a better future for themselves and others. We need to come alongside these young people and engage with them rather than be scared of them, or rather than want them to be like us when we were their age. Some of them have high ideals, but they may not understand the long-term effects of the kinds of changes they want. For instance, I was recently engaging with our students, some of who were demanding that we settle, as a university, we settle all our student historic debt to help poor students. This is historic debt from young years, just wipe it off. And the issue of university tuition fees is a very emotional one in South Africa. And helping the poor is the reason we have such an extensive financial aid plan over and above what the government can offer. In our discussion with students about settling historic debt, which goes to $1 billion, I asked the students, are you saying that you want to be the last generation of students to study at UCT? Because if we use all the finances, the financial resources that we have to wipe out historic debt, that will be the result. If we scrap historic debt, we will have to retrench staff, including our low-level workers, and that won't help the poor. It might sound good and feel good now for us who are at university now, but it will not serve the future. If we settle historic debt and end up shutting down Africa's highest ranked university, shutting down the research that helps us to address health and social and climate change problems, that won't necessarily help the poor. It will help us now. So we've got to be wise about this and at least handle the debt of the students who are currently in the system and are working hard to complete their degrees. Because if we plan to wipe out all historic debt, it will not help these students' children or their children's children. To have UCT shut down, it will be a loss for Africa. Activism must benefit not only this generation, but it must benefit future generations. And that's the message we need for all of us who call ourselves activists. Activism is not just for us who are here now. It is for us as well as the rest of the generations coming behind us who are struggling, who may be poor. Of course, we want to wipe out poverty, but it takes time. And we don't want more people to be disadvantaged. This is just one example of the kind of engagements we need to enter into as we seek to create the Africa we want. There are many others. We need to listen to our young people and also to older people who have been marginalized and learn their perspective, just as we hope they will listen to us and learn from our perspectives. By engaging in this way, we all can gain a wider view of our society and how we can develop it. We can agree on the ideals we want to uphold, on what we want to achieve, and work together on deciding how we will accomplish those achievements. A symposium such as this one is a place of ideas, a place of discussion, and even argument. We don't come here expecting to agree with everything we hear. In fact, often we need to disagree, to go back and forth with opposing ideas before we can find the middle ground where we can begin to build agreement and act on it. In that same spirit, we need to be willing to hear young people tell us their aspirations for their future and for their children's future. We must be willing to accept their criticism because our generation has not stopped the world from becoming what it is today. We also need to be willing to share our experiences and what we have learned so far so that we can take our progress further. Building the Africa we want will always be an unfinished business. As the world changes, we will also need to change. In fact, Africa has the potential to lead the changes that the world will need to make by creating new ways to look at our future, engaging with the generation that will carry us into the future. We can build not just the Africa we want for today, but the Africa we want for our grandchildren and their children. It is now my great pleasure to welcome to the virtual platform my keynote address, Ms. Bogolo Kenewendo, an African economist. Well, Bogolo, I'm a Motswana, so I feel compelled to say a Motswana economist and managing director of Kenewendo Advisory. And she served as Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry in Botswana. Bogolo, I can tell you that I have young children, not so young, the youngest being 24, and every time I talk about taking the future, dreaming big, you are one of the examples that I point to. And I say to them, that's how big you can dream. It doesn't matter how old you are, you can do that. Thank you for showing us as African women and showing our young people on the continent how far we can go. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Prof. It's such an honor to share the stage with you. And thank you very much to the APRM for hosting us, and Ambassador Safura as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so pleased to be joining you this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are, and to really talk about our aspirations, about the Africa that we want, and the role that we can all play in ensuring that we realize that dream of an Africa rising, that dream of a developing Africa. Particularly during this very difficult time. And as Prof said, you know, it's such a privilege for us to be able to meet online virtually as we are, when ordinarily we would be trying to get to UCT or trying to get to Addis or wherever it would be. And some of us wouldn't be able to make it. And while we are feeling a little disheartened by COVID and the inability to travel, I am also getting to really appreciate the level of inclusiveness that these virtual conferences have created, particularly for our young people, and hoping that, you know, they are and we are using this opportunity to engage further and to continue to build more inclusive forums, bringing in young people, bringing in, you know, women into these conversations. And hopefully this will not be the end of this inclusiveness drive. Especially because we have seen COVID really disrupt the way that we do things, and we've seen this pandemic really challenge what we thought we knew, or really challenge the things that we knew were not working, but we kept pushing them under the rug. And now what COVID has done was completely lift that rug and show us that we can no longer continue to hide the dirt of our economies under the rug, but you know, bringing to the fore that our economies are so unsustainable, and our economies are quite fragile, and that the groups that are vulnerable, or the poverty celebrations that we've had, that we've managed to alleviate extreme poverty in some areas, really the cracks are starting to show in our economies, and showing just how vulnerable our societies are to any little bit of a shift in the economies. I mean, at this particular moment, it is estimated that about 20 million African jobs may be lost due to COVID. And this is a very scary figure. What is even more scarier is this estimation by UNECA that around 514 million people could end back into extreme poverty. 514 million people. And just in this year, 2020-2021, about 29 million people have been pushed below the extreme poverty line. And that is really concerning. Those are the cracks that are being shown by COVID, that yes, we had made considerable effort, we had made a considerable development, and we thought people were moving forward. But what is showing us is that people were only moving forward to very unstable sectors in the economy. And what we're seeing is that it's not just, you know, we don't just generalize, but there is a phase to these vulnerabilities, and most of them are young people, and most of them are women. And that's because That's because what we're seeing is around 65 or 74%, sorry, of women in Africa actually work in the informal sector. And similarly, over 60% of young people who join the labor force go directly into the informal sector. And as you know, that is an area that immediately felt the burdens of the COVID-19 economic crisis as countries put on measures to try to deal with COVID, in particular the lockdowns. And these will be really hard to get back. These figures will be really hard to deal with if we do not act with very bold and quite ambitious fiscal reforms, quite ambitious policy reforms as well, to ensure that our economies build back better. What I have also found to be really interesting during this period is that even the ILO speaks to that we are seeing we're seeing gender divergences here when it comes to who's being hurt the most and who's losing jobs. Women are losing jobs more faster than men are, particularly young women between the ages of 25 and 35. And that is a concern because it continues to show that it's not just the instabilities of our economies, but the issues around cultural and traditional barriers that are now rearing their heads, challenging whether a woman needs to be at home to provide care or to continue being out trying to find a job or trying to provide in the informal sector. What I also found really worrying was when it stated that joblessness in Africa is actually quite low and compared to other continents. And I want to challenge that statement because it says joblessness is low because the informal sector is active. But I think that if we see an informal sector being large and continuing to grow, it means there's some serious structural issues with our economies that we need to deal with, because those are not, the informal sector is not an area that we would expect people to settle down into. It should be a sector in the economy where we see it's a conveyor belt. People should join to move, not join to stay. And we should be worried when we can confidently say, no, but our joblessness is not as high as in other continents because our informal sector is quite robust. But actually, we should see that as a challenge to ourselves and to the way that we tailor our policies, that we want people to move on, because these, once again, are very unstable and are the first ones to go when there is a challenge in the economy, because they do not have any cushioning. And we have seen as a result of COVID how countries have been responding, which has been quite worrying, focusing more on the formal sectors and very little on the informal sectors. And this just shows the disconnect that exists between policymakers and what is happening on the ground. I mean, even data shows that disconnect. So we need to see a more retailoring of our policies to respond to the informal sector, which is the largest in our economies. And while I'm still talking about the informal sector, I really want us to also challenge the way we think about our economies. We have been told that globalization, capitalism will be the ones that will help us develop our economies, but we are seeing that that is not true. We are seeing that capitalism is failing, or really there are some aspects of capitalism are failing. And I want to challenge this conference, I want to challenge this meeting for us to really start thinking about what do indigenous economies mean to us. And I know that every time I start talking about indigenous economies, I am challenged. I have had these debates with many economists around the world and say indigenous economies are not sustainable. Indigenous economies do not have structure. And I challenge that, yes, We've said that this free market will be the way to go, but can we confidently say that to the 74% of women and young people that remain in the informal sector in Africa who do not have stable jobs or stable incomes, that indeed this economic structure that we're working on, this one that we continuously make policies around, is the one that will bring development and that will create wealth for everyone in the continent. So I will leave that one to simmer with you and continue on to my next point. So really, as we think about building back better, the verdict is still out on whether this will be a she session or this is going to be a youth recession. Because in the beginning of COVID, we thought, women were the hardest hit sectors, groups really, in our societies, but we are seeing more and more that the data is showing that young people are being hurt more than just generally women, and so we will keep this. We will keep a look on the data as it comes out, because we are having growing fears of another lost generation. Some of you will remember that around 2008, 2009, there were fears of a lost generation because of the economic crisis. And this is because as a generation enters the labor market, they find some of these opportunities eroded, and they find much tougher economic situations. So the issue here is, how do we work towards ensuring that our young people do not become part of another lost generation? We have seen, we were making considerable growth between 2009 and now we're being rocked back, as I have just said, with those figures. So what do we need to do? What will we do in order to ensure that lost generation does not become a reality, and that we do not continue to see economic scarring? There are about 2 papers that I want to bring to your attention, and I particularly like that they were written by young people. One is a policy lead document done by the African Youth Envoy's office, and I would like to really encourage you to read it, because they come up with great recommendations on what can be done, or the expectations of young people on how to build back better. And I know that they have also written a couple more papers that I have found on the AU website, and I want us to really promote the engagement of young people in building recommendations towards us dealing with COVID-19. And some of the things that they have come up with, and I wanted to particularly focus my recommendations on amplifying their recommendations, because I believe in them. I think that they did a great job in bringing out what they think can be done, and they are aligned with what we've been doing, for example, with the UN groups on financing for sustainable development that I've been involved with the G7 Gender and Equality Advisory Council, Gender Equality Advisory Council, and some of the work that we've just been doing globally has been reflected in these documents. And I want to share those with you as the recommendations from young Africans. Once again, I recommend that you read that lead policy document. And some of the recommendations come out as that there needs to be a concerted effort towards upskilling young people. There needs to governments need to encourage opportunities, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and in particular, enable doing business environments, provide enabling doing business environments. We need to be part of designing and implementing policies and policy reforms and that we need to see an establishing and strengthening of social protection systems for sustainable poverty reduction, that we need to see more efforts towards digitization. And this is an issue that I am so glad that it keeps coming up, particularly in an African platform, because this was a challenge for us pre the pandemic, and that we need to invest in modern and digital technologies. We need to adopt people-centered approach when addressing issues related to governance, peace, and security. And we need to see more concerted efforts of capital going towards young people and women. And lastly, as I conclude, I am happy to see and to hear that many leaders continue to talk about how the future of Africa is reliant on young people and on women. But we need to see money where the talk is. We need to start seeing capital flowing more deliberately towards areas where young people are calling for them to be. We need to see our transformation agendas speak quite directly to the empowerment of young people. We need to hear it in fiscal policy. We need to hear it in how budgets are being addressed, that this is how young people will be catered for. This is how businesses will be incentivized to deal with young people. This is how the doing business environment will be more flexible and accommodative of young people's needs. There needs to be clarity there, as well as now every government, we hear them talking about greening the economy, but how are you catering for young people? We need it to be explicit. We need it to be explicit on how we're catering, in particular for young women. We need to hear the gender mainstreaming. We need to hear quite explicitly youth mainstreaming as well. But most importantly, we need to hear proactive measures that are put in place for economic recovery, financial support measures that include a focus on youth, on the poor, that are bold and that can be implemented with a sense of urgency. And lastly, to our young people, I know that some of us are quite disheartened, but I want to say that do not give up. You have started, we have read your papers, and you need to continue writing, you need to continue sharing your voice and amplifying it through different platforms, because the change you want can only happen one person at a time, can only happen one platform at a time, and you should take every opportunity that you can. And remember that youth leadership is African. Again, youth leadership is African. All of our beloved leaders started when they were young. We're talking Thomas Sankara, we're talking Lumumba, we're talking everyone that led to the independence of Africa. If you listen to them, if you go back and find out how old they were when they started leading their movements towards independence, they were in their 20s, they were in their early 30s. So it is not impossible, and it shouldn't be a surprise that you want to lead the charge of us building back better from the COVID-19 economic crisis, because it is only you who will be living through this next decade and the next 3 decades. And it is up to you to decide the kind of future, the kind of economy that you want to bequeath to the next generation. The questions will be on you and will not be on the last generation. I thank you very much. And just remember, the Africa that we want is inclusive, is progressive, and continues to rise. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for that powerful statement. I really like the fact that you touched on young women losing jobs during this pandemic. I think it's very important that you highlight that this pandemic is affecting young people, particularly younger women, more than any other demography. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank Professor Pakeng for those words of encouragement. As usual, she's always robust, encouraging young people to contribute positively to Africa's development. I will not take time and spoil what has already been said. We have two very progressive young women that will respond to the statements given by Professor Pakeng, as well as Honorable Minister Kenwendo. And before I hand over to Ms. Cynthia, who's going to moderate this response, I just want to say that Your Excellency, Ms. Kenwendo, since your appointment as a trade minister, we've seen more African governments actually taking more confidence in appointing more younger and even female leaders as being cabinet ministers, as permanent secretaries. So I want to say thank you. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for actually performing well when you're given the opportunity, and please continue inspiring us. So I want to take this opportunity to invite Ms. Cynthia to introduce the panelists that will respond to the statement that has been given. Ms. Cynthia, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning. Greeting from Nigeria. To this morning, thanks to the earlier speakers today, they've actually set the tone for the conversations today. Like it's been said, Africa today is defined by its youthful population, as young people constitute a high and peaking proportion of Africa's population. And Africa is projected to be one of the continents that would be producing the major part or half of the world's population by 2050. So the conversation this morning will be focusing on the role of youth in peace and security, especially amidst COVID-19. The outbreak of the pandemic revealed major threats to youth development and sustenance, with far-reaching impact on all sectors of the economy. The pandemic, however, did not stop the violent conflict and other security challenges threatening different parts of the continent. Now, as we work to achieve the Africa we want and the goals set in the Agenda 2063, the continent, as has been said earlier, must identify transformative opportunities to harness the dividend in its youth population and for integrating young people in all decision-making processes, especially as it relates to peace and security in Africa. And this morning on this powerful panel, I have three amazing female speakers to respond to the keynote and specifically focus on youth and peace and security in Africa amidst COVID-19. Our speakers this morning, our first speaker would be Sarah Hamonda. Sarah Hamonda works for the African Union Secretariat for Peer Review Mechanism as an officer in charge of the Agenda 2063 SDG unit and South Africa Corporation based in Johannesburg, South Africa. She handles APRM continental work and the United Nations Voluntary National Reviews and the APRM collaboration with the UN agencies. Thank you, Ms. Sarah. Thank you for being part of this panel. Our second speaker will be Ms. Luanda Mpungosi, who is the program officer with the African Governance and Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute on International Affairs, a premium international relations think tank based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Luanda has engaged in youth advocacy and development for over 8 years. Thank you, Ms. Luanda. We have Dr. Ekemini Abasi Iyita Okon, pardon me, ma'am. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies, and her research and supervision interests lie broadly in the international political economy of Africa's development. So I'll start with Ms. Sarah. Sarah, can you hear us, please?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, thank you. So yes, I'll start with you. What are the opportunities for the engagement of African youth to mitigate COVID-19 pandemic in Africa, alongside peace and security issues? And considering you're an expert with the Agenda 2063 SDG units, can you also share APRM new activities and initiatives for empowerment under the 2030-2063 agendas? Thank you, Sarah. Please, you have 8 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, dear Cynthia. Good morning, colleagues, excellencies, African experts, and youth representatives. It's a great honor to be here today and to join such distinguished speakers, and also I would like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Sifoy. I believe that there is nothing I can add more compared to him on APRM and its activities. He's the best representative to talk about the Continental Secretariat and the activities we have been working on to support youth. However, I would like to say that also we are almost 1.5 years since the COVID-19 pandemic conquered our lives. And this misery virus has catastrophic consequences on Africa's economic, political, and human lives and futures. Until today, I think the continent recorded 4.7 million COVID-19 cases, and we have almost 4.2 million recoveries. However, it remains a serious test for Africa's resilience against shocks and disasters. As Ms. Bokhola also alluded and highlighted this complication and complicated consequences of COVID, it also speaks to the multifaceted nature of SDGs and interlinkages between goals and targets. Because from what we see, the COVID-19 has not only affected SDG 3, which concerns about health and well-being, but also negatively affected SDG 4 regarding education and the interruption of study for many youth alongside SDG 8 regarding creating jobs and employment. At the African Peer Review Mechanism, we're also concerned about SDG 16, which aims to build strong, efficient, and inclusive institutions and peaceful societies. This is a priority for APRM expanded mandate, and it touches upon different aspects of good governance, especially with the rising trends of conflicts and violence against female youth. On another hand, the pandemic reveals the significant and impactful role of youth at different affiliation levels. We have health workers, we have doctors at the front line to mitigate the pandemic in many countries, and they are also saving lives. We have seen in the last year that youth associations have also led initiatives in many countries to support localization, domestication, and reporting on SDGs within the pandemic period to ensure the government's ownership and accountability. Amongst these initiatives actually are some initiatives in Morocco. We have seen some initiatives developed by civil society organizations to support the SDGs domestication. We have seen also that youth have been empowered by small loans and grants in order to start localizing and expanding the production of pharmaceutical products and masks and other products can be useful to combat the pandemic. In Egypt, Chad, Nigeria, the APRM is also pleased to support various youth initiatives. For instance, we have been partnering with the Center for Good Governance and Development in Egypt. We have been offering a 3-week training on leadership specifically for African executive women. We believe that even though, as some distinguished speakers mentioned, that with the interruption and the difficulty to travel, we believe that we can still continue our training through virtual platforms. These kind of virtual platforms offer the great chance to share experiences among African females on leadership skills, awareness of SDGs, and the role also in the governments. We are also expecting to, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I'm saying that also in Ghana, the anti-corruption coalition that APRM is also proud to support in many activities has been seeking to tackle the increase of domestic violence against women within this current depressing economic conditions of COVID-19. So alongside the government fund, the civil society in Ghana has been also developing a specific fund in order to support the vulnerable groups. In Senegal, also we have seen youth initiatives to develop digital platforms in order to raise people awareness and preparedness about COVID-19 against fake news. That said, building trust in government, reducing violence against women, and mostly important, also discourage youth to join extremist groups due to poverty or lack of adequate learning and education opportunities remain imperative issues for African youth. Of course, we are all aware of the current changes of conflict trends in the continent in the last 10 years and the uprise of non-state armed groups, especially in North Africa and the Horn of Africa. These are basically working on mobilizing youth in these intra-regional conflicts. Therefore, the APRM has been standing with diligence to address Africa's response to COVID-19 from governance perspective. And we have been developing various policy-oriented programs and initiatives last year until actually this year, and we will look forward to sustaining these initiatives For instance, the first initiative we have done is establishing the Continental Task Force on COVID-19. This task force has been meeting regularly at the continental level, and we have been also producing various research and policy oriented papers and reports like the Africa Governance Response to COVID-19 in order to stock takes on member states' preparedness and different policy interventions against the pandemic. Our second initiative is also incorporating resilience as a thematic area into the APRM governance assessment. As His Excellency Ambassador Sifoy highlighted, we have been conducting governance reviews for many years, but also we are learning by doing that we need to incorporate resilience indicators, not just as a fancy word, but we need to understand how countries are prepared. And we are planning also to develop continental capacity building training for national executives on resilience and how they should be prepared at operational level to mitigate shocks. As many speakers are referred to Agenda 2063, unfortunately, the agenda doesn't have sufficient indicators to respond to resilience. And we believe that by incorporating resilience into APRM governance assessment reviews, we are offering a privilege to our member states in order to consider this component as a part of the governance overall, or the broad governance assessment with its 4 aspects. We have been also supporting and strengthening our partnership with different partners like the UNDP, SIDA, and other partners from Europe and across the globe in order to support member states in addressing KPIs and indicators pertaining to SDG 3 and economic transformation, digitalization, and food security. The 4th initiative is support think tanks and research universities' activities on Africa's response to COVID-19. Of course, our privilege relation with UCT and also other South African universities is a clear example, but also we are planning now to expand our engagement with other African universities across the continent. We have also developed an innovative type of governance reviews. It's called targeted reviews on specific issues pertinent to governance SDGs nexus. And I think my colleague Lennon has been quite active to develop some target reviews on youth role in decision making, like I think a recent study on Namibia. We have also recently developed a study in Sierra Leone and the COVID-19 response and national policies. In Sudan, we have developed a governance gap analysis last year. So, I mean, we are trying to develop as much as we can our methodologies to be adequate to the needs of our member states. Lastly, but not least, on SDGs, we are also launching a new study on the implementation of CEPA principles for the effective governance, effective implementation of SDGs. CEPA refers to the Committee of Experts on Public Administration affiliated to UNIDESA and the ECOSOC, the Economic Social Council of the United Nations. And they are addressing principles of effectiveness, integrity, accountability, and inclusiveness of SDGs. We hope to develop training for African youth and experts based on the recommendations of this baseline study, which will be launched soon. And we believe that it's important to work on the operationalizing these principles because they can assess the voice of youth and their inclusion in decision-making at national level. We also believe that cooperation with regional economic communities will be essential to diffuse knowledge on these principles. Lastly, but not least, maybe a few takeaways I would like to say, 3 or 4 key messages regarding peace, security, and youth issue in the COVID-19 times. First, peace and security require strengthening youth engagement in Africa's industrialization and digitalization. As Ms. Bokhola mentioned, the fragility of our economies, it's simply because we are consuming too much compared to what we produce, as simple as it. And our African economies, even the strong industrial bases we have in the continent, like in South Africa or Morocco or Senegal, the economies are not working with full capacities. So these national and regional industrial initiatives can absorb a huge working forces that other continents are actually looking after. Africa remains the lowest among other continents as regards physical response to the crisis and the vaccine administration. Therefore, accelerating Africa's continental free trade area is one of the major opportunities and lessons learned to fill Africa's gap in medical and healthcare, manufacturing, and even basic products. Second, alongside empowering youth by creating more jobs, we also need to consider that pursuing resilient societies will not be achieved or sustained without resilient youth. And here I'm not talking just about the tangible resilience, but also mental resilience, how African youth can deal with conspiracies, with stressful news, and also fake news coming out of social media sometimes. Lastly, but not also, the third message is that the implementation of Agenda 2063 and its flagship projects, including the free movement of African citizens and removing the travel barriers between African countries, shall be promoted to build further solid African identity. For me, as a North African woman, I would never have a chance to discover how our continent is beautiful if I was not offered this chance to work for the APRM. And it's an honor to be there, but also many other African youth, including researchers, artists, and even entrepreneurs, they hope to remove the travel barriers and also exchange insights between each other and build innovative solutions for their countries. Fourth and last message is that the African Union should empower education across the continent for leaving no one behind, alongside decreasing the root causes of conflict in a holistic approach by engaging youth and developing a fair social contract for African citizens. As one of the inspiring youth from Zimbabwe told me last year during the Africa Regional Forum for Sustainable Development, if you want to silence the guns, you need to increase the pens. I thank you for listening, and thank you, Cynthia. I apologize if I took longer time than expected from me.
Thank you, Sarah. That was quite insightful and elaborate. Ms. Luanda, can you hear us? Just confirm.
Yes, I'm absolutely able to hear you.
Thank you so much. So the question for you this morning is, how can Africa deepen transformative youth participation from a policy perspective, especially as it relates to youth, peace, and security in Africa? And within the context of COVID, are there some examples of youth agency amidst the pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Allow me to stand on existing protocol. I greet everybody on this call, organizers, leaders of the respective organizations, panelists, the moderator, of course, of the session, and my fellow youth. I'd like to then begin my response by reflecting on the youth participation as a concept, because that's where I believe we don't have a coherent understanding of what this youth participation is, and especially because it's the title of today's event. Africa's normative frameworks have very robust and expansive perspectives on youth participation. However, there is policy incoherence on how youth-related and youth-relevant frameworks are understood and implemented in our continent. In the African continent, contrary to countries' reported achievements in areas such as the protection of children's rights, and Ambassador Sifui already started to speak about preparing youth in terms of education and so forth, their interventions do not lend themselves to participation as espoused by the 2006 African Youth Charter. Vast amounts of national policies across the African continent take a rights-based approach, such as the right to education, right to employment, and so forth, and leave out Article 12 of the African Youth Charter, which is very, very important. According to this significant framework, youth participation is defined as the ways in which young people can be involved in processes, institutions, and decisions that affect their lives. Roger Hart, a children's rights academic, contends that youth participation is a fundamental aspect of citizenship and an integral part of democracy. With political will, young people can and should ascend to the highest decision-making structures. And this is, of course, evidenced by the appointment of young leaders such as Ms. Bogolo, and I share in my brother Lennon's commending and really paying homage to her, because she set a tone that has really put us on as young people and really demonstrated agency. The principles of participation are also rooted in scholarship. The participatory governance holds that participation is based on more elaborate and diverse principles, institutions, and methods. Essential are a more equal distribution of political power, a fairer distribution of resources, a decentralization of decision-making processes, the development of a wide and transparent exchange of knowledge and information, the establishment of collaborative partnerships, and emphasis on institutional dialogue and greater accountability. And dare I add, even intergenerational dialogues as well. So young people continue to constitute the core competence while also representing a significant number of those affected by armed conflict in the African continent. Also violent extremism, banditry, violent protests, and gender-based violence. Additionally, young people represent those who are actively involved in peace building processes in their communities and in their respective countries. This is anchored by the Youth for Peace Africa, which seeks to also dispel the widespread notions of youth just being manipulated or perpetrators of violence, but it shows the agency and positives of youth participation within the youth, peace and security. The framework on youth, peace and security, which was adopted in 2020 as we were going through this global pandemic, it states that youth, peace and security is the conscious actions and processes to protect young people from participation in and the ill effects of violent conflicts and insecurity, and to promote their support and contributions to peace efforts in conflict and post-conflict situations. Therefore, to a very large extent, Africa's plans to silence the guns require engagement and participation from its young people. However, as partners and not just as beneficiaries. Madam Chair, tokenistic approaches to participation are becoming increasingly unsustainable in a continent such as ours, where it is predominantly youthful and continues in that demographic trajectory. In the SADC region, the nature of conflicts and tensions tend to be unique compared to the rest of the African continent. A key factor that distinguishes this region from others is the relative absence of fully fledged conflicts or civil wars in the traditional sense. SADC is among the regional economic communities in Africa lauded for its progressive processes in formulating plans and strategies on youth, peace and security, evidenced, of course, by its adoption of the framework, the Continental Framework on Youth, Peace and Security. However, there are high levels of economic and social inequalities within the region, which contribute to the root causes of conflict and the tensions which directly impact young people. These conflicts and tensions stem mainly from structural and cultural violence attached to social, demographic, environmental, and economic and political factors. Some of the main peace and security issues identified in Southern Africa include sexual and gender-based violence, xenophobia, land conflicts, corruption, economically disempowered youth, radicalization, the early stages of violent extremism, gangsterism, the recruitment of young people in violent groups, police brutality, and climate injustice. So some of these issues, if not most, are not new. They were not brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, however, have been underlying for quite some time and have since been perpetuated or exacerbated by this pandemic. The evolving situation in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique presents a completely new dynamic given the region's perceived absence of armed conflict and subsequent approach to peace and security. So under best practices, young people in SADC have demonstrated their capabilities and agency through awareness raising, leading peaceful protests, conflict prevention initiatives that strengthen grassroots capacities and build tolerant and inclusive communities. Being equipped to respond to violent extremism requires young people to broaden their understanding of peace and security dynamics in the region and engage in intergenerational dialogues and participate in different platforms to effectively capacitate communities to contribute to regional strategies for new forms of conflict. A group in the Western Cape, South Africa, called Africa Unites is one that can be lauded really as best practice. It's a group of youth human rights defenders whose work and activities seek to build peaceful, tolerant, and conducive communities through conflict mediation programs in vulnerable communities such as Gugulethu. This is a community characterized by poverty, inequality, and violence and poor service delivery. Africa Unites thus works with different community stakeholders, including church leaders, civil society, schools, trade unions, business forums, youth groups, gang leaders, law enforcement, and local shop owners to create a dialogue on key factors contributing to conflict and in their community, allowing for increased participation and resilience. If we are not consolidating our efforts on the expansive and meaningful aspects of participation as per the Africa Youth Charter, we will continue to see inconsistencies and rising tensions in this continent. Lots more work still needs to be done in effectively implementing the African Youth Charter, specifically Charter Article 12, and really the allocation of resources, abandoning tokenistic approaches, embracing intergenerational engagement, which has been done in this platform today, and co-leadership. And finally, to ask what is happening with the Office of the Youth Envoy, because that has been a very important vehicle through which young people can be voiced and really participate. And are we going to see an appointment of a youth envoy after Ms. Ayachebi? And with that, I'd like to thank you and hand back to you.
Thank you so much for that powerful intervention. And I'll go straight to Dr. Ekemi Niabasi. Are you here, Doctor?
Yes,
Dr.
I am.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So beyond the politics and policies of youth participation and development, what key strategies can be deployed to achieve progressive results in integrating youth participation in peace and security in Africa, especially amidst the COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you. 8 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for that. Also allow me to stand on existing protocols. I'm greeting everyone in the panel today, the moderators and fellow youth across the globe. Today, I will start off by just summarizing or touching on key points that the presenters had made, which relate or has some sort of synthesis with the points that I'll be making today. So first of all, Ambassador Sifuwe's presentation was indeed powerful, and I did appreciate his mentioning of the fact that African youth are cognizant of where we have been, where we are, and where the continent still needs to go. I'm also appreciative of the fact that he mentioned that youth participation in political spaces, economic spaces, alignment in our education program are all key factors, key building blocks in building the Africa that we need, in harnessing the value or the benefit that youth can bring in propelling the continent forward. Also, Mr. Michael also mentioned that bringing the youth on board to national and international development strategies are important, again, emphasizing or foregrounding the importance of youth in any form of development, be it economic, be it human. Our very own Professor Pakeng also mentioned the importance of listening to our youth, which is something we seem to have a problem with in this continent, especially coming from our heads of state, and also mentioning the importance of activism where youth are rebelling against a system that doesn't serve them. And of course, there is a need for government to listen to what the youth actually require or need. And finally, Her Excellency, Ms. Kinuendo, also mentioned and gave us some stats on the implications of COVID-19 and how it is probably leading to throwing people back into poverty lines or extreme poverty lines as well. So I'll start off by saying, African youth are aware of the issues that we are having. So is our government. Our government is also aware of the issues that youth have brought to the fore. And it's important to understand that there needs to be less talking, there needs to be less policy making and policy drafting, agenda setting, and more implementation. I think, as Prof. Pakeng mentioned, it's not just enough to discuss and talk about these things. It's great that we're talking about it because it means that people or governments are listening, are realizing the importance, the centrality of youth in any form of development. But at the same time, it's important to implement strategies that would see youth give their best, that would prevent any form of brain drain, causing our youth to go contribute and make meaningful contributions to other economies in the Western world, then putting their benefits or achieving benefits and adding values to the African continent. So I would say, first thing, two key things that we need as youth is capacity. We need our governments to build capacity, one, and secondly, we need our governments to incentivize our youth. It's not enough. I mean, when you look at the unemployment rate in Africa, currently standing at about 6.19%, it implies that there are gaps, there is a capacity, there's something that youth can do in changing our economy, in catching up in synthesizing our economies with the fourth industrial revolution. It's important to create spaces. It is important to acknowledge that our youth can bring value, can add value to our economies and fund that. So by creating capacity, we mean funding, there should be funds invested in research and development, utilizing our universities, utilizing our schools. I mean, I cannot tell you how many videos I have seen on YouTube, on the World Economic Forum, of various talents in different parts of the continent, you know, young people creating things that address the situation, address a need in their respective spaces, and governments have not been able to reach out to them. And before you know it, you know, other universities in the world, say for instance, Ford, are co-opting or taking our youth, offering them scholarship, offering them positions, offering them something, incentives for them to add value to their respective economies. So this has to stop. Although there are policies being made on a continental level, these policies on the continental level have to be met by national strategies, and not just policy-wise. There has to be active implementation. What do I mean? For instance, COVID-19, as Prof. Pakeng mentioned, as well as the Excellency mentioned, has exposed how unsustainable the inadequacies of Africa's economies. And there has been, in response to that, there have been so many startups by African youth, you know, in addressing the inadequacies, the limitations of our existing economies. Startups that go from delivering food and water or providing basic services to rural areas where governments or government officials don't even get there. But when it comes to election, ballot boxes do find their way there. Having startups that reach out to those areas and providing basic amenities, having startups that provide medical care, affordable medical care, to old age homes, to communities that don't even have hospitals in the nearest 1-2 kilometer radius. So these are things that governments can invest in. These are things that government need to prioritize. And also in forging our economy forward in a post-COVID-19 era. All right, yes, at this point, we're still dealing with the implications of COVID-19, but moving forward right now and in the near future, what do we need to do? My advice would be that as youth, we should not fall prey to the single story narrative where we focus on fourth industrial revolution and focus on the white economy or the digital economy, and forget that at some point, Africa used to be the food basket of the world. So there needs to be, I came across this article the other day talking about Africa's development and the fact that Africa's development or Africa's economy is not a single colored economy, but a technicolored economy. So everything from our blue economy to our green economy, our white economy, our gray economy, which is thriving at the moment, it accounts for about 80% of the jobs, which is the informal sector. The gray economy is the informal sector. These are things that our government needs to prioritize and look into. How can they fund, how can they incentivize youth to take up spaces in these different colors of economy to ensure the Africa that we talk about, the Africa that we put in different agendas, the Africa that we discuss and we hope and we dream of. We need to take practical steps, and of course, capacity building and incentive or provision of incentive definitely falls on government. So I would say in conclusion, there should be less talking on the part of our government and more doing. And finally, I think I do appreciate Prof. Pakeng for bringing up the importance or the centrality of women in our development pathway. And I was yesterday in my reading and in my own little research, I came across a Twitter account. The owner of this account basically embarked on a journey or embarked on an initiative to look at laws that specifically discriminate against women, not just in Africa, across the globe. And she is currently on day 365 and she hasn't stopped. So that in itself tells you that it's not just about continental effort. Continental effort has to be met with national efforts. And if there are laws within different countries in the continent that are members of the APRM, that are members of the African Union, there needs to be some sort of punishment mechanism or ways to hold these governments accountable in order to repeal these laws and make sure that women also have equal opportunities as men and so as youth. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kemini. That was a powerful intervention, and I think this session really has provided a lot of insights and building upon the session in the morning. And I'll just do a quick recap from the session, key takeaways from the session this morning. The need to incorporate resilience resilience indicators in assessing operational capacities of countries to respond to shock. That was emphasized this morning. And then effectively addressing peace and security requires countries adopting more intentional approaches to strengthening youth industrialization and digitization. Then there was a conversation around evolving education structures and systems that truly leaves no one behind. And I think Sarah made the point on removing travel barriers within the continent to promote exchange of experiences, trade, and innovative ideas for development. Luanda talked about the need for an explicit and comprehensive approach to achieving active youth participation as provided in the African Youth Charter, not the one-sided approach that a lot of governments in the continent have adopted. And she emphasized the need to decentralize decision-making processes and promote intergenerational dialogue, and then also the need for embracing co-leadership with young Africans and strengthening. She made a call for strengthening the office of the African Youth Envoy, which is an important and strategic office. But she also highlighted that young people are currently leading within the continent through raising awareness, leading activism for social and political change, and participating on dialogue platform. And I think our last speaker, Dr. Ekemini, mentioned that there is an importance in policies at continental levels and meeting national strategies that are promoting effective implementation of these policies, and that governments would need to take conscious effort to incentivize youth engagement in all sectors of the economy. And she talked about the centrality of women in all of these conversations. What are the governments within the continent doing to ensure that laws and policies are gender sensitive and protect the role of women and the rights of women? And finally, she emphasized the need that this conversation today for her is about less talking and more doing. I think this has been a powerful session, and like Professor Fateng mentioned in the morning, the conversation around building the Africa we want remains an evolving conversation that must address the needs of today's Africa and the needs of future generations to come. And our powerful keynote speaker had emphasized that we need to work to ensure that our young people do not become another part of a lost generation. It's been a powerful session. Thank you to our wonderful speakers this morning, and thank you for the conversation and the participation this morning. I would end this conversation, and I would say working together for the Africa we want requires a collaborative effort, and Africa can no longer ignore its youth, because the youth are the hope for the present, and they are the strength that would support the development of the continent. Once again, thank you. It's been a pleasure being the moderator for this session. I'm Cynthia Mbamalu from Yaga Africa, Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cynthia. She herself is a powerful activist and leader within Yaga Africa in Nigeria. And now we'll break quickly to a video before moving on to the next session.
What we do as APRM is we are an organization of the African Union. So we conduct reviews in countries.
One of the biggest challenges facing the continent is really good governance, or the absence of it. The objective is to promote good governance at the political level, economic level, corporate good governance, and socio-economic development. Those are the 4 pillars.
That's really the core business of the APRM, conducting reviews of countries and writing reports on those countries, and then working with those countries to implement the reports of their own on the state of governance in their own countries.
And it is so important for Africa to have this kind of tool, because governance is critical to socio-economic development.
We're to ask ourselves the question, to say, therefore, we need in the first instance a partnership among ourselves as Africans, not only country to country, but also people to people.
Universities constantly advise policy makers. When governments in those countries articulate policy, they don't articulate policy in the vacuum. No, they articulate policy which is evidence-based. So that's what we want to encourage on our continent.
Good governance must be promoted. Good governance must not only look at processes, but also look at deliverables.
Millions of young people in Africa bear the brunt of poverty, unemployment, and other social ills. This platform hopes to propel young people to become drivers of solutions.
We cannot just assume that we can train young leaders to fall into line with our established systems here on the continent and economic models.
And what we're going to do is we're going to create the Africa we want.
Where is Africa located in the fourth industrial revolution?
What are the policies in place that allow us to thrive in 4IR?
We are not too young to be relevant.
The youth and the women of this continent are really not just the future of the country, but our biggest asset right from now.
And we think the best way to reflect more clearly on the Africa we want to see is to do it with young people.
So the youth are you could say, the heartbeat, the majority of our population on the continent. So we cannot really envisage this future Africa, united continent, without factoring in the role and position of our youth in it.
And I believe very strongly that if we harness the power of the youth and women, we can achieve the Africa we all want.
And so as the youth, we must have the courage to stand up and take responsibility and say, here is an issue. Let us figure out a way to solve it because it lies with us.
And I think whether in parliament, whether at the mayor level, at the council level, at the presidency level, at the minister level, young people have to be in every single key position of leadership.
And I think that the APRM provides a unique platform for civil society, business, and government to talk about governance issues in ways that are sometimes not possible or not encouraged in countries. And so I think it's a wonderful tool that really can open up the conversation about how the lives of people are made better.
The African peer review system should not be treated as incidental, that you do everything else, and when you've done whatever, in your spare time, you say, well, what about the African peer review? I think it has to be integral. It has to be integral to everything that we do every day.
Now, we have made tremendous progress. And what do we need to do? We need to do more of the good things that we have done. And we need to make sure that when these good things are done, they are done for a purpose. And what is the purpose? To make Africa a continent that will be regarded as one that is making life better for all its people.